Well, welcome everyone to the third webinar in Clever's Elevating EdTech series. Today our topic is acquiring new teachers for free, and we have David Kofoed Wind as our amazing guest. So just to introduce myself, I'm Dan, co-founder, chief product officer at Clever, and in a previous life I was a teacher and a tech director in Denver. Today I'm so excited to have David Kofoed Wind as my third guest in Clever's Elevating EdTech series, because his company, Peergrade, is one of my favorite examples of an EdTech tool with a freemium business model. David's built a free product that's so viral, teachers are going crazy trying to adopt it. And they're doing amazing work turning that incredible teacher interest into a business that's growing incredibly quickly. So I can't wait for all of us to learn from David about how to get that rapid teacher adoption for our EdTech products. In a second, I'll ask David to tell us how he got started with Peergrade. It's a really fun story. But first, I'm going to take care of a few housekeeping details. First of all, this is an interactive webinar. I'm going to ask David some questions for the first 30 minutes or so, and then all of you will have a chance to ask him about your company and your most pressing issues. So please ask us anything. You can use the GoToWebinar question tool, but you can also tweet at us. And in fact, we'll be prioritizing questions asked on Twitter today. So if you tweet at Clever with the Elevating EdTech hashtag, we'll make sure to get your questions answered by the end of the session. Last but not least, the session is being recorded, so no need to scribble like crazy and take notes. We will be emailing a recording of this to you once it's wrapped up. Just give us a day or two to process that. So please make sure to ask questions. I think that's usually my favorite part of these webinars, is the questions that the audience comes up with. So think of some good ones and send them our way. Great, well, let's get things started. So David, I think we really shared something in common with our companies in that we started our companies to solve problems that we personally faced. Can you tell us a little bit about your path before Peergrade and what led you to get things started?
Yeah, of course. So I have a background as a mathematician from a Danish university. I live in Copenhagen, Denmark. And after my math degree, I started a PhD in machine learning. And during my studies and also into my PhD, one of the things that I liked the most was teaching. I'm not a great researcher, to be honest, but I really like teaching, and people kind of like being taught by me. So the first thing I did was that I asked to be able to teach my own course. And I had this course. It got a title that had big data in it, and everybody loves big data. So instead of the proposed 30 students, I had 150 enrollments the first time I ran it. And 130 or 150 students with a weekly assignment you have to submit, that's just a completely ridiculous amount of grading work, about 40 hours a week or something. So I thought, can I do something else? Can I do something that's a bit more interesting than multiple choice? So I sat down and I built Peergrade for myself. And Peergrade is this tool where students can submit some work and then they can review work by other students. So for my own class, it was about replacing me as a grader, and that led to both the students getting better feedback and to me saving some time. So I started Peergrade not as a business, but just as a tool for myself, essentially.
Yeah, to save yourself from spending all your nights and weekends grading.
Yes.
So that's amazing, and it sounds like your tool is really helpful for your course. But how did it grow outside of the course that you were teaching?
Yeah, so my supervisor, of course, found out about this, and I thought he was going to be mad, but he was super excited. He said, I want to use this. I went to my other supervisor, and he was also excited. So now I had 3 users. And then one of my supervisors said, David, you should actually try to sell this to the department. And it kind of didn't really make sense for me to sell my own software to myself through my department. But he was like, yeah, come with me, go to the department head. The department head was like, what is this Peergrade thing? What does it cost? And I was like, I don't know, $800. And he was like, And then I said, okay, what if I take only 1 teaching assistant instead of 3? And he was like, it's a good deal. I'll take it. And then I left the room quite confused, right? Because first of all, I promised to build Peergrade. I had to send an invoice for something I didn't have a company or anything. And then also I only had 1 TA now. So what I did was that I called up my old high school friend Malte and said, like, I need some help building this thing. What I can do is I can hire you as my 1 TA, and then I'm going to try to run the course with 0 TAs, but you build Peergrade instead. And then he got a bit of money that way. So we just managed to kind of do it. We built a company, or we incorporated and sent the first invoice, and then we got started that way.
That's awesome. And in those early days, it sounds like you found some amazing early adopters, some people who really believed in your vision. But I'm guessing maybe not everyone was signed up and bought in immediately. Did you run into any challenges or any people who were critical or didn't get what you were trying to do?
Yeah, most people. I think it was everything from students to instructors to administrators, right? The students were confused about like, what, we're grading each other? That sounds crazy. Some of the other instructors said like, that cannot be done. There's all these challenges. And the good thing about back then was that we hadn't promised anybody anything really. I was our first user, so I could just talk to my own students and say, what don't you like? And they'll be like, oh, this doesn't work. And say, okay, we'll fix it right now. We'll sit here and fix it while you look at us. So we could iterate very quickly. We could go to my supervisors and ask them like, what data do you want to see in a dashboard, or what isn't working for you, or what's working really well. So we had some very, very passionate early users that we were sitting literally in the same room as, which is good. It's also a challenge because you build a product for 3 people and you better hope that scales and those 3 people are representative of something. Otherwise you have 3 users forever. But it's definitely a good way to get started and have some users that would like use the product a lot every day for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the best way to get started. I'm sure you've probably heard the Paul Buchheit advice. It's far better to have 10 users who are obsessed with your product than 1,000 users who are mildly interested. And so I think having those intensely, that ability to have, daily feedback cycles is just so amazing when you're trying to find product market fit and trying to build the thing that works. Okay, so at this point you've got your course, using and being the alpha testers for Peergrade and some other interest across your university. How did things go from there?
Yeah, so I guess from there we learned in multiple iterations that our product was built in somewhat the right way, but not actually in the right market yet. So first we started talking to people about this, and they said, it sounds interesting, but this obviously only works in computer science when there's right and wrong answers. Otherwise, students can't grade. And we're like, I don't think that's true, but I don't know. So what do we do instead? So I sent an email to University of Copenhagen, to the humanities department, and I went there and presented Peergrade, and they really liked it. It was only a pitch deck. There was no product demo or anything. And they're like, okay, we want to buy 10 licenses, 10 courses. And this was like introduction to philosophy, English grammar, some really weird stuff from my perspective. And we're like, I don't know if this is going to work, but it worked really well, actually. It worked a lot better than it did in computer science. So we're like, okay, that's super interesting. The problems are not the same. The users are not using it exactly the same way, but the students are even more engaged here. And then we thought, okay, I wonder how far we can stretch this, right? So we wrote, me and Malte went to high school together, so we wrote to our old high school teachers and said like, hey, we've built a tech product. Does this make sense in high school? And they were like, yeah, it's totally smart. Like it makes sense. We're talking about peer feedback right now. And then they started using it. And one of the things we learned at that time was that high schools and schools in general are kind of nice, because if you talk to a university professor about adopting your product, they'll say, wow, it looks really cool. I'll use it next year when I teach again in like 12 months. But if you talk to a high school teacher, they'll say, super cool, I'll use it on Monday. So you get this adoption rate that's just 50 times faster. And that really, it's really important for growth that you can hit people every week, not just the week before the semester or something. There's like a very, very small time frame for adopting university professors. Yeah. So we went into high school, and then from there on, it just got lower and lower and lower. And today people become very surprised when I tell them that a lot of our users are 8 years old and go to 3rd grade. And it's actually interesting because peer feedback is used in kindergarten, but of course not with Peergrade, because you can't type on a computer. But Peergrade kind of starts when you can type and read, then you can start using Peergrade. And that's a surprise even to us, I think.
That's amazing. And one of the things I think many early stage entrepreneurs are, they're just desperate to find some niche that gets really excited about their product. And it sounds like you guys found that niche right away with computer science, but then you explored other avenues really quickly. And how did you think about that trade-off between, really focusing on computer science? I'm sure your computer science users had lots of features they wanted and lots of directions it could go, versus kind of expanding to other parts of academia.
Yeah, it's a good question. I still don't think we've solved it, right? So today we have this like incredibly weird user base where we have 8-year-olds and we have corporate learning and we have like 800-person machine learning courses, and they don't like the same things, right? The kids are asking for more emojis and the business schools are not asking for more emojis, right? So we have this like product that has to fit everybody in, and I think there is a trade-off of focus and breadth, right? And we're going for the broad attack right now, where we see different values in different segments of the market, but I don't think it's necessarily only a good idea to go that far out.
Yeah, it's hard to keep the tent, everyone inside of the tent when you've got such a diverse set of users.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that you just mentioned in the story is, well, your very first usage of Peergrade was actually sold, right? You sold to your supervisor. Mm-hmm. But as you started to roll it out, I know at some point you started to do free trials and free use for teachers. And how did you decide to take that freemium approach versus saying, hey, no, if you want Peergrade, you have to pay for it up front?
Yeah, actually, so I was just a machine learning PhD student. I didn't know anything about educational technology. And I actually remember what triggered us specifically, because we've been thinking about freemium for a while, and it's a lot of people do freemium in edtech. And then what happened was that we got a tweet from a woman on Twitter called Jennifer Gonzalez. She writes this thing called The Cult of Pedagogy. And she wrote, I didn't know her, she just wrote to me, hey, I'm looking at your product, I'm potentially going to include it in a guide, but it has to be free. Like, good products are free in edtech. And I was like, okay, I don't know about this. And she said she would include it if we made it free. And we're like, we've been thinking about this for a while. Let's just get it over with and make a freemium version of Peergrade. And so we did that. We told Jennifer that we've made it free. And then she put us in a blog post right after called 6 EdTech Tools for 2017. And that is what got us into K-12. That blog post alone has generated, I think, thousands of teachers at least has signed up because of that one blog post. We've tried to replicate that later, but it's impossible to hit anything that's close to that blog post. So she made us take the leap and go freemium, and then she also brought us thousands of users. So I feel like it's a fair deal. But I think when we look at it today, the thing about educational sales is that educational institutions don't want to buy a product that they don't know is going to get used. But when you have a freemium version, you have teachers using it already. So when you go to IT or you go to the instructional designers, you can say, hey, you should buy a pro license for Peergrade because you already have 50 teachers using it and they like it. And you can go and talk to these people and they'll recommend it to you. So you kind of remove a very big barrier when you're doing the sale.
That's awesome. I think one thing I hear from entrepreneurs is about freemium is there's sometimes some fear, like, oh no, if we give away a free version, we know schools don't have a lot of money and teachers don't spend a lot of money on software. So how will we ever get them to convert to the premium version? And how have you thought about that in your sort of paywall in your product?
Yeah, I think you definitely need venture capital if you want to go for a freemium education play. It's going to take a long time. Yeah. What we felt was that in the early days, for the first year, we had no free products, and we managed to sell it to institutions. So when we started the freemium, we had this like, okay, to make Peergrade into a big business, two things have to happen. We have to be able to get users, and we have to be able to get them to pay. We know we can get them to pay because we've already done that. So if we can get users now, then we can always make them pay later. But we don't need to solve the payment problem if we can't solve the user problem. So let's just focus on that for now, and let's get back to the payment problem later. Maybe that's a bad idea. Maybe we realize later that that was a mistake, but I feel like we always want to focus on the bottleneck. And for us, the bottleneck has and still is user acquisition. And if we one day we want to like turn up the money valve, we can make some changes to the pricing model that we need to. But right now, it's not really the biggest problem for us to monetize, but rather to get more and more users.
I think it's a really great insight that I think a lot of times people are like, oh, well, if I'm going to do freemium, I need to be 100% focused on the free product at first. And then at some point down the road, I'll figure out how to monetize. But by running, what was just your business, but I could call monetization experiments early on, you kind of have that faith, hey, we know that the revenue is going to be there. We know institutions will pay for this, and we're striking a really valuable need. So we can really focus on that free teacher acquisition. I like that a lot. That's a really cool insight. And so now that you have an established product and how do you get those free teacher users? You got that initial blog post that was such a big win, but what are your other methods for getting teachers to adopt and grow the top of funnel?
Yeah, so actually, I printed out some stats from our funnel metrics. So I can see that when people sign up for Peergrade, 60% of them report that they heard about it from somebody else. About 45% is directly from a friend, and then we have a good chunk, like 15%, hear about it from conferences. And conferences is not us being at conferences, that's teachers presenting about Peergrade. I think one of our smartest hacks I feel like we've ever done is that when people are really active on Peergrade, they get an email from us saying, hey, you're super active on Peergrade, you should give a presentation to your colleagues about it. Then we send them a mug or a t-shirt, and then they go and present to their colleagues. They do a PD seminar, they go to a real conference. And we can only do this because the teachers love our product. But when they do, they take 20 teachers with them onto the platform. They help them get onboarded. They help them sign up. So they really scaffold the whole sign up process. And
That's
then
amazing.
The rest, the last 40%, it's a mixture of people blogging about us. We blog a bit. We do some social media, but every day multiple teachers tweet about Peergrade, and that's, I think, one of the biggest drivers also of our happiness. There's nothing better than getting into the office, looking on Twitter and seeing people taking pictures of smiling kids and saying, I love Peergrade, that's better than revenue. And that's kind of what drives most of the user adoption today, I think.
That's amazing. And I love that idea of sending your very active users a nudge saying, hey, it'd be great for you to present. We might just have to borrow that strategy for Clever. I think it could work really well for us. So David, one thing I'd love to hear about is, Peergrade has joined the Clever library, our solution for creating kind of a marketplace for teachers to try out free and freemium software. What was your decision like in deciding to do an integration with Clever library, and how's it gone so far?
It's gone really well. So yeah, we're on the Clever library, and when I think actually I wrote to you guys about something else, and then you're like, oh, we're actually solving the same problem, which is calling it Clever library, and I was like, perfect. It's exactly what I need. Because as I said earlier, user acquisition has and is still a super important problem for us. Clever Library brings 10% of our users last time I checked, which is a pretty good chunk of our users that come that way. And the good thing about the teachers that come through Clever is that they bring with them their students. So when they join with the Clever login, they get a list in Peergrade of their Clever classes, and then they can pull the students in automatically and create the class with the students in them. Because for our activation funnel for teachers, the biggest drop-off is when they have to invite students, because it feels very, I'm going to invite other people, and what if it doesn't work, and then they'll see it and all those kind of things. We kind of skip that step with Clever, which is maybe a bit scary as well, but it works. And when they actually get the students on, they're very happy. So we get a good chunk of users from Clever Library, and we activate them a lot more. So it's super, super good.
That's amazing. Yeah, so happy that we can kind of skip a funnel step and skip some of that drop off in your user funnel. And as I think about this, I think one thing I'd love to maybe pick your brain on is, let's say, I'm sure there's a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience right now who are building products and either thinking about or have that freemium model. What are sort of the key stats or the key things to measure to know, are their users happy? What are the things that you focus on your dashboards every week?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the things we've been struggling a lot with in terms of the classical metrics is our retention metrics, because it's not that we have bad retention, but we have weird retention. First of all, education is super seasonal, but especially in higher education, you have some weird seasonality. So in the beginning, we had everybody churned, it seemed, until they came back a year later. So we had these you use it for 4 months, and then they churn for 8, and then they come back again, so they're not actually churned. And also, Peergrade is not a daily product. It's probably not a weekly product for many teachers as well. It's more a monthly product. Yeah. So we have a lot of weird retention numbers, but we can see people keep coming back year after year. So retention is something I would generally advise people to look a lot at. For us, we look a lot at active students. We look a lot at the thing they have to do in Peergrade that's very important is they have to write a good peer review. So what we look a lot at is the number of peer reviews written, because we have this belief that the more peer reviews they write, the more they learn. So that's kind of the one activity in Peergrade that's super important. And then for instructors, we look for the magic moment, some people call it, right? When is it that people get value from Peergrade? And the challenge for us is that comes relatively late. The place when teachers see magic from Peergrade is after they've run a peer feedback session and they see like, wow, so much feedback given between my students. So it's about, we have a funnel we can visualize where we can see like how many people go through creating a class, creating assignments, inviting students, and all those things, and then go to the final step of actually running a session. And we need to get that funnel better and better and better, right? So we get more and more people to that magic moment.
Yeah. What are some of the experiments or things you've built in the product that help people, get to that point of value?
Yeah, I think a pretty simple thing we did at one point was that in the beginning you signed up for Peergrade, and then you had to click the create class button to create a class. Then you had to click the create assignment button to create an assignment. Now you sign up, we ask you what's your class called. Then you create a class, and then we ask you then what's your assignment called, and then you make an assignment. So we took away a lot of those steps, then kind of forced you into the next step in the onboarding flow. And then we saw that our biggest drop off in the early days was that to use Peergrade, you had to make what we call a feedback rubric, these questions that the students use to review each other. And that was really tricky for the teachers. So we made a default one where they just get like, what was really good, what was really bad kind of questions. Yeah. And I'll say 50% or more of our users use that default rubric, but it's a lot easier to get started that way. We've added things such as like join with Google, join with Clever, join with a class code, join with an email, join with a username. You can join in 100 different ways. We don't want that to be the problem. So everything you can kind of smooth off to make the process better is things we work on.
That's awesome. And do you have kind of a built-in process for kind of looking at those numbers and coming up with hypotheses about what might be getting in the way of teachers, and then experimenting? Are you doing some A/B testing, or what do you like? What is it like these days?
Yeah, we're actually not doing that many A/B tests. It's kind of
that's
a little bit dirty to say we don't do that. We should be doing more A/B tests. We run some. We've run maybe 5 A/B tests inside the product. Yeah. But the ones we've done have always given results. So maybe that means we should do more, or maybe we're good at picking the spots where we need to do one. But yeah, that is a good idea.
Yeah, and so we were just talking a lot about kind of the metrics side of the house, but what about the user feedback side? Other than happy tweets, how do you make sure that you're staying close to your users? As I'm sure you're probably not teaching a class anymore and using Peergrade as a user yourself.
Unfortunately not. That was the best piece of feedback. I'm still using that class on a weekly basis as argument in our discussions. It's like, but if I was teaching, I would like this, or I would like that. So it still sits with me. Like, I know that class by heart, how I would like the functionality to work. We have a support chat in our app that is available to students and teachers. And we have somewhere around 20 conversations a day. So we have a library now of like 13,000 user feedback pieces that we've categorized into different feature requests and so on. So today we have we don't need more customer feedback. That's not our problem. We have a lot of it, but we've made it very, very easy to talk to us for all of our users, and we reply. I think my median time of response is 1 minute and 10 seconds.
Oh, wow.
And that's 24/7, and that's me, myself, right, the CEO. I have the fastest one. So we reply within 2 minutes, almost always, and we fix your problem. If your class is broken, we fix it for you. If your students can't log in, we'll talk to them. That takes a lot of energy, but it gives us a lot of benefit that whenever things do not work, people don't get angry, because we will help them, and we figure out what are they not figuring out, and then when they get through their first problem, then they start mentioning all the other things they actually didn't understand. So we've educated our users to be very, very good at telling us what doesn't work. And sometimes it feels like nothing works, but that's just because they always tell us if something is slightly confusing.
That's an incredible focus and dedication to customer support. I love that. And I know, that is one of the biggest ways to win the loyalty of teachers. Sometimes I've even thought that, you're better off messing some things up and then getting them right, fixing them quickly, than always doing it right, because teachers really do appreciate when they're heard and when things are responded to and fixed quickly. I love that so much. David, this wasn't on our plan, but one question I'm really interested in asking you is around investment. You mentioned that, hey, if you really want to invest in freemium, that takes a lot of capital to run a business that's not focused on revenue for a while and get that really big mass of kind of free users. What was the fundraising process like for you and Peergrade?
Yeah, it was actually pretty good, I think. So we raised our first round of capital in 2016 in Denmark from a bunch of angel investors. These were people who've built companies themselves in tech. One of them built Unity, the big gaming system, and so on. So these were like tech, modern web people. And I think they heard about this and they said, it's never gonna work. And I was like, yeah, but we already have revenue. And they're like, that sounds odd. Like, I'm going to invest in this because I don't understand how this would ever work, but you seem to be making it work. So I'm going to try it out.
It's a really good fundraising strategy. Get your investors to invest.
Yeah, it's the YC model, right? Like, the best ideas are the ones that sound odd but kind of work anyways. I think that's what we've been doubling down on. The like, students can't grade each other, can they? And I'm like, I have some statistics that can show you that they can, and these kind of things. So we did that, and then a year later we went to Y Combinator, like Clever also did at some point before us, and then we raised some more money from a bunch of VCs in Denmark, Germany, and the US.
Awesome. How was your Y Combinator experience? Folks ask me all the time, hey, is it worth it? Is it a good idea to apply or to do it?
It's totally worth it. I think what's interesting about our experience is that the best part about the YC experience was not the actual being there for 3 months and getting advice, because I knew all of those things already. I read all the books, I read all the blog posts, I've seen all the videos, like I've done all of that. It was all the other things, like it's the network you get, it's the other founders, it's the brand value, it's the demo day, it's all the things that's beyond the advice, because you can read that you're supposed to do things that don't scale on the website. That's not new, but it's hearing the specific stories from very specific people, and then it's all the other things around it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think for me, almost the best part about YC, in addition to that, was like the focus, like how little time it takes to do the program. They're not asking you to show up for things all the time, and how good they are at getting you to focus on the things that are important, talking to your users, building your product, growing your number of users, every single week. It's easy, at least for us, I thought, to get distracted early on.
We had a really hard time because we went in the summer. Maybe you did too, but I had a really hard time getting teachers active in July. They were all like, oh, I love it, I'm going to use it in September. I'm like, no, it's after demo day, please use it now. And they were like, nope, there's no students. So every week we met founders and they're like, oh, we grew 20%. And I was like, yeah, we lost 70% of our users last week. It's going really, really good. So we came into YC relatively late. We had a product, we had customers, we had users, we had a team of 8 people. And then we went into summer destruction mode where every user left us for the summer. So we left 8 people in a 3-bedroom apartment in bunk beds. Wow. It was tough. It was a tough time, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we got, this was not at all skill or strategy. We just got kind of dumb lucky. We had basically no school users when we started YC. And it turns out for early Clever, our target audience was school district administrators. And June through August is actually the best time to talk to them, because all the teachers are on summer break and they're thinking, oh, what are the new technologies and solutions I should adopt for the school year? So we, without knowing it, kind of walked into the best possible YC time and got to have that nice graph. But congratulations on fighting through the seasonality, and then also raising a great round, even with a YC graph that didn't look the way that you wanted to look.
We always make our user graphs in a different way, right? We make them semester by semester. So we take the best month of every semester and then we plot that as a point, then it looks nice. We don't want something that looks like this. It doesn't look good for VCs.
I love that. I love that. That's a great takeaway. So everyone on the audience, we are going to switch to your questions in just a moment. So please make sure to tweet at Clever with the Elevating EdTech hashtag. And also, or use the GoToWebinar tool to ask your questions for David about acquiring teacher users, running a freemium business, and anything else that comes up. Cool. Well, David, I think I just have one more question for you. You talked about doing the reading and all that. What are the books, blogs, and resources that have been the most helpful to you in terms of building Peergrade?
Yeah, of course, I think most of the knowledge I have today comes from doing things, but also from talking to people like you and other people in the space. I've learned a lot from other edtech entrepreneurs. A lot of that, the content I actually do read comes from Y Combinator. They have these amazing blog posts, handbooks, course videos, all of this material. If you haven't read it, that's the place to go. And then in terms of books, I haven't really read any good edtech books, but I've read some generic, really good startup books. The two most famous ones that everybody talks about is like 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. You can hate the man, but the book is pretty good. And then there's The Hard Thing About Hard Things. You can probably also hate Ben Horowitz, but he's also pretty smart and says some really good things in that book. And then I think a book in the other direction is Rework by the Basecamp people, David Heinemeier, a Dane and a programmer, and then Jason Fried. The good thing about Rework is that it takes an hour to read or something like that. So I read it, and then I was like, that was a really good book. I'm just going to start immediately again. And I read it once more because every chapter is like a page and a half. And it's just like, it's so condensed, really, really good knowledge that some people think some of it is a bit cheesy, but every time I read that book, I get 5 ideas for what I should change tomorrow. So I should probably just read it once a month, I think, until I remember all of it. But yeah, that's a book I would definitely recommend reading at least once because it's so short.
I think I might read it on my flight home. You can't get books finished on a San Diego to San Francisco flight, but I think Rework might fit. That's awesome. Do you have a favorite Paul Graham essay?
Oh, there's so many. I downloaded. I spent a whole day converting them all to EPUB something and sending them to my Kindle. So I'm rereading them now on my Kindle, one after the other. I think there's just so many nuggets of good stuff in there about, like, I think one of the very good things he says at one point is like, the way to raise money is to figure out why your business is actually worth investing in, and then telling that to the investor. That's it. There's nothing else to do. It's not so hard, right? Just like convince yourself and then just tell the truth, right? And I think people are always trying to come up with these crazy schemes, and it's B to B to C, and like just like figure out why this is actually worth investing in, and then tell that to somebody. And if it's worth investing in, they'll give you money. You can try to scam your way around for a long time, but if the business is legit, you'll get a yes eventually, but you might get a lot of no's, right? So I talked about Unity earlier, and they went through 100 VCs before they finally got money for Unity, and then it was Sequoia Capital, and then they sold it, or they went IPO or whatever with that company. It became massively successful. So even the really popular cases sometimes have to go through a few VCs before they hit the target, but it's just about keep going.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard the classic Airbnb story of, no one would give them a dime, and they were selling collectible cereal boxes just to stay afloat before.
I read they have all the letters of rejection on Medium, I think. You can go and read the VC thing, like, we're not so excited about the travel industry and all this. It's very good for when you have one of those dark days. You go and read those rejection letters. And then in our office next door, we have a big wall poster of like positive tweets about us that we posted to the wall. So whenever you feel depressed, you can go to the wall of joy or whatever and just look at that for a while and be like, okay, people actually do like it. Like, even if they're angry on intercom, they're not all bad.
Yeah, I love that. That's another one I think I might have to take for Clever, is to create a wall of joy on our office. I love that. Great. Well, let's turn to some of the questions from the audience. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Great. So the first question is from Atif. Sorry, Atif, if I'm not pronouncing your name right. And his question is, do users in higher education, business, and third graders see different interfaces when they log in? And does that present problems for the UX, UI teams within Peergrade?
They do not. So we don't have anything that differs between our users. They all see the same product, and it becomes into this thing where one thing that's interesting to say here, which might confuse some of our users and piss them off a little bit, is that the most confused users are definitely not the third graders, right? It's always the corporate learning people and the MBA students. They have no idea how technology works. Wow. Right? They do not know how to log in, and these are people working at like tech companies and so on. They don't know what to click, and So they're actually the one who needs the most scaffolding, I think, not the third graders. They'll figure it out. But if we had to pick when we build a feature, who do we base it on? Then we base it on the third graders, because I think that's better. It's better to design for the third grader than for the corporate learning person, because they probably don't know what to click anyway. So make it big and blue or whatever, so you can find the buttons. But it is a challenge for the business side, right? That we don't necessarily have a tool that looks like a corporate learning tool, or looks like a university tool, or looks like a school tool. It's not like full of rainbow colors and emojis and those kind of things. So it's kind of a consensus product in some way, which is tricky, but also allows us to hit many markets at once, which is it's good and bad, I think.
Yeah. Do you think 5 years from now that there will be sort of different flavors or skins on Peergrade?
Yeah, I think so. I think at least part of it will be different. 5 years is a long time. Let's see what's going to happen in 5 years.
Yeah, who knows? Awesome. This is a question from Dan, but I promise it's not from me. There's another Dan in the audience who says, it seems that many and most districts require contracts in order to share student data, and that contract usually comes along with the purchasing process. With a free app, do you encounter problems with data sharing contracts?
Yes, a lot. It is maybe after Clever the biggest unsolved problem left in the space. So somebody out there go and solve this. There's a big problem with privacy thing. I'm in Europe, right? So I know like this is even worse over here. But you also have COPPA and FERPA in the US and CSPC and all these crazy things. So the EdTech freemium business model is it's hit very hard by this, because you have districts coming at you with a data processor agreement and saying, before our teachers can use your free product, you have to sign 40 pages of legal docs. And I'm like, but I'm not going to sign 40 pages of legal docs if you don't even use the free product. That doesn't make any sense. Why would I spend time on that? And you're just in a catch-22, because that's how it is. So we've gone through all these certification processes with different vendors and tried to become as compliant as we can up front. And then we've made an agreement that we have a standard data processor agreement we can sign with people. And then if they have their own, they have to buy what we call a campus license. And that at least enforces them to get up to some scale, because if they can't pay us anything, we can't sign custom legal documents. It's simply too much work for a 10-ish person team. Yeah,
no, that totally makes sense. I do think there's some exciting progress being made in the US. Two things that I want to call out, because this is something I think about and might maybe obsess over all the time. One is that with the Clever library, every application on the library, like Peergrade, assigns this we call a kind of universal DSA, and it establishes some kind of minimum requirements for Peergrade from the application in terms of protecting data, what they can do with data, and of course also the library very much limits the data that goes through. It's just student first name and last initial. And so the combination of those things have meant that 98% or 99% of the districts on Clever have said those are enough privacy safeguards for us, and we feel very comfortable, with those applications in the library being adopted by our teachers without having to sign custom agreements or custom paper. So I think that's one way that we're kind of helping the free and freemium tools get adoption without any big legal challenges.
I think it's super smart, right? And I think there's a need for something similar as well in the rest of the world, with like you should, instead of writing your own terms and conditions and privacy policy, you should be able to subscribe to one like Creative Commons and say, we are like level 4 privacy certified. We just take the level 4 one, whatever that means, and we do that. And then you can just require to say like, you should be this compliant or we don't deal with you. And then you don't have to read every single company's completely homemade terms and conditions, which is bonkers, right? Nobody does that except the districts do that.
Yeah, and even them. And then the second thing I'm really excited about is that there's a national alliance called the Student Data Privacy Coalition in the US, and they've established some national terms. I think it's something like 25 different terms that they recommend as best practices. And unfortunately, because in the US, all these privacy laws are at the state level as well. So there's a national organization and then there's state affiliates, and the states make their kind of statewide data sharing agreement. And there's one in California that's really taken off. Most districts in California are using it, and many vendors have signed it. There's also great progress in Massachusetts, Florida, Texas, and a bunch of other states. And so that, not the easiest to say, hey, there's 50 agreements that you might need to sign for every state, but they're very similar.
It's much better, right? I've signed a few of those myself, and that's a lot easier for me to deal with.
Because, you know, in the US at least, there's 13,000 school districts, and if you had to sign 13,000 agreements, you know, the lawyers would never get finished. Well, good to hear. Great question, Dan, about privacy. Next up, I've got a question from Mike from Busy Education from Twitter. He appreciated the talk and wanted to know, what do teachers find useful and insightful through Peergrade?
What do they find useful and insightful? That's a good question. We had a question for our teachers once in a survey about like, why are they actually using Peergrade? And they all had slightly different reasons for using Peergrade, which was a bit of an annoyance. We hope like we could just find the one true answer in our data sheet. But a lot of it comes down to a few kind of keywords, right? So one of them is the ability to give feedback and receive feedback is something that we need to train. Everybody needs to be good at giving and receiving feedback, and we don't really get formal training in it ever. And you cannot just take a feedback 101 in college and become a good feedback giver, right? You need to train it over a long time. So that's like a very obvious thing you do in Peergrade. The other thing is, and this is a bit harder, right? It's like the reflection, the critical thinking, these kind of skills. One of the surprising things for me to say maybe is that students generally don't trust each other's feedback. And that's actually a good thing in Peergrade, because when you don't trust the person you're getting feedback from, you read it much more carefully, you disagree, you counter argue, you complain to the teacher and say like, this cannot be right. And that's exactly where the learning is happening, right? Giving feedback is not taking some words or text and then giving them to you. You didn't learn anything from that giving thing. You learn from using that feedback, from thinking about it, from working with it, and so on. So in Peergrade, you learn a lot more from giving feedback than receiving feedback. And you learn a lot more from what we have this thing called feedback reactions in Peergrade, where we ask students to review the feedback they get, to say like, was this feedback useful, and so on. So we really like lead them into this process of thinking about the feedback, how am I going to use it, and so on. So all of these very soft concepts, such as critical thinking, reflection, and so on. And then I guess it's just often easier to see your own mistakes in other people's work. When you're reading your own text, you're just like, this is perfect. It's exactly what it's supposed to be. And you see somebody else's work and they're like, wow, this is super bad. Wait a minute, I did the same thing, I think. And then you go back and fix it. So I think that realization is what a lot of teachers come back to us with and say that by seeing other people's work, they see good examples, they see bad examples, they teach each other, they reflect about their own work, they teach giving feedback. So you can say Peergrade is a lot about the meta subject things. It's not necessarily about geography. You also learn a lot about geography by peer reviewing in geography, but you also learn all these other concepts around geography. The challenge about that is that it's hard to measure critical thinking. So it's not easy for us to come with a report and say like, they're now 17% more critically thinking, your kids, but because the teachers like it, we know that it works, basically.
Yeah, and I think at some point we are going to figure out how to measure those kinds of critical thinking skills. I mean, I think the push to the Common Core in the United States is a step in that direction, although it is a hard thing to quantify. David, you know, you mentioned one of your original motivations for starting Peergrade was to save time. You know, you had a massive class and you just were a little bit overwhelmed by the potential grading. Does Peergrade deliver on that promise? Does it save teachers time?
For some people it do, for some people it doesn't. So the people who use it with that purpose, they save a lot of time. But I would say the majority of our teachers are not using it with a time-saving purpose, but they potentially might reallocate some time. So they can take some of the boring grading time away, and they can use it on interacting with students and talking about the feedback and so on. If you have a large higher education class with like 100 or more students, you can save a lot of time. Like, because I had the 150 submissions every week, and so what I built into Peergrade back then was a thing called flagging. So if you don't like the feedback you get, you can flag it for moderation. That was the way I got my students to accept this weird idea. They were like, we don't like this. And I was like, okay, I'll build a flagging thing and you can flag the feedback. And if you flag everything, I'm going to grade everything. And then I crossed my fingers. And then in the end, they only flagged around 10% of the submissions. So I only had to grade 15 papers instead of 150 every week. And that saved me like literally 90% of my grading work, right? So that's extremely dramatic amounts of hours that I could save.
That's awesome. Next question is from Michael, and he said, how did you convince VCs that freemium was the right model to go? Were they on board with that already, or did it take some education for them to come on board with that model?
I think actually the VCs were more on board with freemium than other people are, because they're like, go big or go home, kind of. We don't need you to make $100,000. It doesn't matter. We need you to get 100 million users, or it's not really important for us. So a lot of our VCs have actually been pushing for the freemium version. I think that's the VC model. I don't know if it's a good model for the entrepreneur, but it's definitely the way they think. They're like, no, just like get more users. Just ignore the money, David. We'll fund you. Like, just get more users. But when we raised our first round, we were not on the freemium version. So back then we didn't have to make that argument, but then later we did it with the first VC money.
Yeah, I think that's very, very characteristic of Silicon Valley VCs for sure. Did you get that same, was it the same sense from the European investors that you worked with?
Yeah, the European investors made their money in the Valley, and then they brought them back to Copenhagen. Yeah,
so all the same culture, makes sense. A question from Dylan. He was curious about billing. Do you bill schools annually or monthly? And then what if, they kind of change? Well, and then what do you bill based on? And if the thing you bill based on changes throughout the year, how do you handle that?
Yeah, we bill annually or multi-annually if it's bigger contracts sometimes. They pay for monthly active students essentially, or active students. So if you buy 100 licenses on Peergrade, you can at no time have more than 100 active students. Mm-hmm. And a student is active if they're using Peergrade in some way. And then if you buy 100 at January 1st, and then in the middle of the year you realize you need 200, then we upgrade you to 200. You pay for the extra 100 for half the year, and then you renew at the new amount. That's kind of the model we found to be okay, because it allows us to start small and grow pretty fast. So we have a lot of education institutions like universities where they come in 2 teachers, then it's 5, then it's 20, then it's a department, and then they suddenly say, hey, can we do a bulk pricing something for the whole university? And it means that we never really have to do a lot of selling. We only have to do the very first sale, which is easy because the money is pretty low. And from there on, they're already a customer. We already signed the DPA. We already sent an invoice. And then when we suddenly send them the email saying, hey, you're over your limits, they're like, oh no, like let's find the money now. Which is just, it's a lot easier that way, but it also takes a longer time. Like you probably could skip a few steps if you went directly for institutional in the early days, but it's just hard for a small team that we don't have a lot of salespeople. So that's the best way for us to go about it.
I love that kind of land and expand model. And are you pretty strict with your limits? Like if the 101st student tries to log in, do you block them or do you let them through?
We just get a message on Slack saying every morning at 9 a.m. we get a message about who's over their limits. And then we're like we don't want to punish these people right now. But if it's like a customer that's a lot over and we know we can make money from them, we'll send them an email a bit faster, right? It's very manual. Because we don't want to have like, these people are very, very disruptible, right? If they suddenly go to class and the product doesn't work, they're going to be very angry. So it's not really a problem for us, and we don't want to like suddenly block something. But eventually we'll write them like, okay, you have a week now, and in a week we will block you, and then they suddenly find the money. So it always works out in the end, but we don't want to enforce that kind of strict regulation.
Yeah, I think that kind of soft limit is definitely a best practice, because getting in the way of a user who wants to use your product is never a good idea. We've got a question from Shannon. She was wanted to dig in a little bit more to that paywall, and what are some of the features and functionalities that you only get if you do the paid version of Peergrade, and how much you've experimented with that so far.
Yeah, I think actually that's one of our weak points of our pricing is the way we've split the freemium from the paid. To be honest, today we've decided to do it so that we only limit you on functionality. So you can have as many students for as long time as you want, but you don't get group submissions, self-evaluations, weights, LTI integrations, those kind of things. The problem is that the teachers then don't really get exposed to the functionality that they don't have. They get a free trial for a month in the beginning where they can try all the features, but it doesn't really hit them hard enough, I think. We could be more strict, but we wanted to have an incentive to share. So if we put a restriction on number of students, number of classes or whatever, they wouldn't really grow with us. They wouldn't add more students, they wouldn't add more classes. And we're like, even when we do a department license today, what we really want them to do is to push it out and get all their teachers on. So we don't want to block them all the time on that. We want them to say like, oh, what about all these features you need? Is it a good idea? I don't know. I think if I could go back, I might cut it a different way and say like, you can have one class at the same time, you can have this many students. But if you make a cap on students, it's going to hit all the university teachers and not the K-12 teachers. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. It's not so easy, especially when you want to do as broad a user base as we do, want to kind of cater to everybody. Then there's no good way to cut it, right? There's always going to be somebody who gets hit by the pricing model.
Have you ever thought about like you get to do 5 assignments for free, and then more assignments cost money?
We thought about it, but then my intuition would be that like a lot of teachers are like, I'm never going to start then. So I only want to invest my time into this if I know I can use it. And we often see at the institutional level that they come and say, price is not the problem. Like the problem is getting people to use this and investing the time in onboarding and PD and so on. And if they know that all of that might not be worth it eventually, they don't want to even start. Once we get them activated and happy, it's fairly easy to monetize. And the trick is for us is the LTI integrations. Yeah. That's what universities really want to pay for. And that's a higher ed thing mostly, but that's super, super important for the universities. And they're always willing to pay for an integration, single sign-on, those kind of things. But they don't want to pay for like core product features, it seems.
Yeah.
But there's no right way to do it or wrong way to do it. I don't think we've hit a very good pricing model yet, but it's hard to change the pricing model. People don't like that. So we're waiting a little bit before we do that.
Makes sense. Thanks for being so candid about your different experiments and thoughts. Another question from Michael. He was really impressed by the teachers that tweet how much they love Peergrade all the time, and was wondering if you had done any outreach or put any effort in to try to activate teachers in sending stuff on Twitter.
No, actually not. One of the things we've found, which is kind of depressing, is that every time we feel like we found something that we're like, ooh, people are tweeting about us, can we do something to get them to tweet more? No matter what we try, we can never really replicate the things that happen on their own. The best blog posts are the ones we don't pay for. The best Twitter engagement comes from us not touching the computers. So we're basically at this point, we're like, okay, let's just not do anything and let's just see what happens, because that seems to be more effective than anything we can do. Which is, it seems good. It's like, ooh, this is like organic growth, but it's so annoying because you can't turn it up, right? You can't invest money in anything that kind of works, which is a bit frustrating. On Twitter, it's simply people are happy. It's mostly K-12. Higher ed, they never tweet about anything. They're just like old angry professors. That's not true, but it feels that way, right? Where school teachers are like, a lot of them are young, they use Instagram, they're a bit more open, they take pictures of their cool classrooms, they work in a different way. And then what often happens is that we get mentioned in these ed chats of different sorts, where somebody will have a Twitter chat about something and ask like, what do you guys do for reflection? And then people will chime in and say, oh, I really like Peergrade, I tried it last week. And somebody will say, ooh, you have to tell me about Peergrade. And then they start tweeting about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, we found very similar things with Clever, that the things that resonate the most and have the most impact are really authentic. And maybe you can encourage or nudge a little bit, plant some seeds, but if you really try too hard to make things happen, then people kind of smell that marketing, oh, you're marketing to me, I'm going to stop paying attention and stop, kind of tune it out a little bit, which kind of.
I think it's also, the freemium is important for them, right? Everybody likes free products and they want to share free things with people. Yeah. We have this guy in Denmark who he's a researcher at like Department of Didactics somewhere. And I think he's gone physically himself to 50 high schools and presented about Peergrade without us ever being part of it. Because like he's teaching about feedback, Peergrade is free. So there's no problem for him in talking about that as a good example at all the high schools. So we can always see like, oh, Jesper's out, like we can just see all the signups coming at the same time. It's like probably him out some new high school. So when you make a free product and you're nice to your users, some of them become like really, really happy and go and spread the news without you having to do anything. But it does require often a free product and at least a good product.
Yeah, I love that. Great. Well, David, we are unfortunately at time. This has been an awesome hour. To have a few reminders for our audience. Number one, we've got one more webinar in this series. It's April 16th at 10 a.m. I'm talking with my co-founder, Tyler, about how Clever grew from 4 to 1,000 schools in a summer. You heard a little bit about that. That was our YC summer that David and I were talking about earlier. It's going to be great. It's an amazing story. Really excited to see you there. We will be sending a recording of this webinar to your inbox, so stay tuned. It'll come in a day or two. And last but not least, if there's anything that you'd like to learn about Clever, maybe you'd like to join our library, please send me an email. I'm just Dan@Clever, and I'd love to hear from you. Well, thank you, David, so much. This has been an amazing conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, see ya.
Bye.